But what happens in the spring, when it's about the time the dogwoods are blooming and everything's coming to life in the springtime, is water temperature warms up, the length of the days get just right, and the crappie sense that it's time to go do their spawning thing, and that happens to coincide with what we call spring. Flowers blooming and all that good stuff. Well, that's great because that's happening right now. We're here at about March 31st, 2023, and we got a beautiful spring day right here in Tennessee, folks. And the topic of today's video is really something a little bit different that I don't hear a lot of people talking about, but it's kind of something that I'm interested in and I pay attention to, and that is the moon. So we're going to kind of talk about the moon and the moon phases a little bit, or actually, I guess what we're going to do is talk about the moon and how I kind of pay attention to it a little bit. Give you some tips there that might help you out. You really don't have to do anything, but just pay attention to what the moon's doing and see how that might or might not affect your fishing. Like right now, for instance, today in March 31st, I just took a look at a website that I watch all the time. It's called timeanddate.com. So it's called timeanddate.com. So I go there and I can see the phases of the moon, right, in relation to the date and time and all that stuff. I'll put a little screenshot of it up there and you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. But I use this to kind of watch for instance, the moonrise. I like to watch the moonrise. Like today, the moon should be rising about 2:45, as I remember. I think about 2:45 is when the moon's going to be rising today. So as you move like into tomorrow, it'll be a little bit later, 3 something. The next day, maybe 4 something, 5 something. So as you move on each consecutive day, the moon will rise later and later in the afternoon, till eventually it'll be rising at night. And it'll just keep going like that, okay? So each day that it moves later in the day, you know, each afternoon, the next afternoon it's a little bit later in the day when it rises. Eventually it'll get to where it's a full moon, and that full moon will happen basically right at sunset. So the full moon will happen eventually right at sunset, which I've always felt like is a good time to fish. But I kind of plan my fishing trips around that moon a little bit. In other words, if I check it out and it says, okay, well, the moon's going to be rising at 2 o'clock this afternoon, then I might say, okay, well, I want to make sure that I get out there at least by 1 o'clock and start fishing that hour before the moon rises above the horizon, and maybe be there, you know, for a little bit after it rises above the horizon. So that gives me a couple of hours of fishing around that peak of when the moon is coming up over the horizon. Now I know it doesn't sound like much, but I'm kind of pretty well convinced that there is something to it, because I've experienced it many times. During that moonrise, it can be a pretty good little peak window for fishing.